A widow left to die by in-laws was saved by a struggling widower who made her his wife. The snow had a way of swallowing sound, making the world seem like it had gone quiet for good. It crept into the bones, settled behind the ribs, and made even breathing feel like surrender. She stood in the doorway long after the wagon tracks, vanished into the trees, holding her shawl tight around shoulders already bowed by too much silence. They hadn't looked back, not once. The cabin was barely more than 4 walls, and a stove with a crooked pipe that coughed more smoke inside than it sent out. The windows didn't shut right, and the floor had a hole near the hearth where a rat had chewed through. It wasn't a home. It was a place you put something you didn't want to deal with anymore. She walked inside, slow and small, like her. Limbs didn't know if they were welcome. Set the little canvas sack they'd left her with on the table, a chipped bowl, some dried beans, and a flint too dull to spark right. No matches, no bread, no name was spoken either. Not once had they said her name in the weeks since her husband's burial. Just she and her and the widow, like saying it outright would make her real again. She lit a fire with the last match from her apron, coaxed it with kindling until the flames clung to the logs like hungry hands. Then she sat on the floor, wrapped in the only quilt left behind, and waited for the cold to get inside her skin. Her name was Ada, but no one had called her that since the baby died. Outside, the wind twisted through the trees like it knew something she didn't. The walls creaked. The stove sighed. She tried not to think. Just keep the fire alive. Just keep breathing. The first night was the worst. Every creak of the roof sounded like footsteps. Every brush of wind at the door felt like a knock. She didn't sleep. Not really. Just drifted in and out, eyes open, heart pacing like a horse smelling wolves. Morning came with grey skies and stiff joints. She boiled water for tea she didn't have, and watched the steam rise like prayers she didn't believe in anymore. Her hands were raw, her lips cracked, her stomach begged, but nothing inside her moved. On the 3rd day, the food ran low. She rationed the beans into 3 piles, then 4, then 6. Drank water from the barrel outside and came back in with her dress soaked to the thighs and skin burning from the wind. She was always cold now, not just her hands, her heart too, like some part of her had frozen and wouldn't thaw. Then the dog came. She heard him before she saw him. A low grunt, almost like a cough, and then the sound of something brushing against the side of the cabin. She opened the door, half expecting a bear or worse, and there he was, grey-muzzled, limping, fur matted with snow and burrs. His eyes were cloudy but kind. He didn't bark. He just looked at her like he already knew what had happened. She left. The door opened. He walked in, laid down near the fire with a groan, and didn't move again for hours. That night, she gave him half her beans. He didn't eat like he was starving. Eat slowly, gentle, like he was being polite. She didn't name him. He didn't ask for one. The days passed like pages in a book no one wanted to finish. She counted time by how many sticks she had left in the woodpile and how often the dog stretched and shifted in his sleep. Sometimes she talked out loud just to hear a voice, even if it was only her own. Told the dog about the time the baby smiled in his sleep, or how her husband used to whistle when he came back from town. The dog listened like it mattered. Snow fell every day now, thick and quiet, the kind of snow that smothered the world. The worst thing was not the cold, not the hunger or the loneliness. It was the feeling that maybe they were right, her in-laws, the ones who brought her here in the first place. Maybe she was too empty now. Maybe there wasn't anything left in her to save. On the 7th night, she couldn't get the fire going. The flint sparked, but the wood was too damp. Her hands shook too hard. She huddled with the dog, wrapped in the quilt, heart thudding like a slow drumbeat. If she closed her eyes now, she wasn't sure she'd wake up. She thought about her husband then. The way his fingers used to tap against his cup in the mornings. The way he used to hum when he was fixing things. But that had been before he started drinking harder, before the silence grew too big between them. He had still loved her. She, a thought, in his own way, but grief had made strangers of them both. She dreamed of warm bread and sunlight, of hands that held instead of hurt. When she woke, the cabin was warm. At first she thought she was dead. The fire was going strong, real strong, and the stove glowed red at the seams. She sat up fast, dizzy. The dog was still there, tail thumping softly. Then she saw him. A man, tall, broad-shouldered, coat heavy with snow. He was setting more wood. By the hearth, careful not to make noise. His beard was grey at the chin. His boots left wet prints on the floor. She didn't speak. He didn't either. He finished stacking the wood, looked around like he was checking for danger, then turned. To leave. She found her voice in the doorway. "You didn't have to." He paused, turned just a little. "Somebody had to," he said. Then he was gone, and the wind filled the space he left behind. She stood there a long while after. The warmth in the room was sharp, almost painful, like it was waking something in her. She shut the door slowly, sat down beside the dog and cried, not loud, not like in the stories, just quiet tears that slipped down without permission. Like her body remembered how to feel before her heart did. She didn't sleep that night, either, but not because she was afraid, because she was thinking. The next day she swept the floor. She boiled water and scrubbed her hands clean. Fed the dog, sharpened the dull flint. It still didn't work, but she tried again anyway. She didn't know who the man was, just that he hadn't asked questions, hadn't looked at her like she was a burden. I just saw a cold cabin and did what needed doing. That evening, she stepped outside. The snow had stopped. The sky was low and heavy with pale gold light, like the sun was too tired to rise all the way. Her boots sank deep into the snow, but she walked anyway, just a little, just to see if her legs would carry her. A trail of footprints led up the hill, wide steps, purposeful. She followed them part way, then stopped. Something in her wasn't ready to go further yet, not without being asked. She turned back, light the stove, sat by the fire with the dog curled up beside her. For the first time in weeks, she hummed. Just a little tune. A lullaby from when the baby was still small enough to carry with one arm. Her voice cracked, but she kept humming. The man didn't return the next day, or the one after. But every morning there was more firewood stacked near the door. She stopped rationing the beans so tightly, started writing her name on a piece of bark over and over again, just to remember how it felt. Ada, Ada, Ada. Her fingers remembered first, then her voice, then something deeper. She cleaned the window with melted snow and watched the hill, not expecting but hoping. One morning she opened the door to find something besides wood. A tin of coffee, not new, but full. She held it to her chest like it might disappear. The dog barked once, low and pleased. She smiled. It was a small smile, a quiet one, but it stayed. The trail up the hill was narrow, worn only by deer and wind. It curled between black trees and frozen earth, and her boots slipped more than once on the frost-bitten moss. She didn't know what she was looking for, only that she needed to see. Not to thank him, not even to speak, just to see the place he came from, the world that made a man like that. The dog followed her, limping, patient, his breath white in the morning air. She hadn't named him yet. Part of her was afraid to. Names had weight. At the top, the trees parted, and there it was. A house not much bigger than her own had been, but stronger. Stones lined the bottom walls. A proper chimney. The roof sagged on one side but held. Smoke rose straight from the flue, steady, disciplined. Someone had taught it how to live right. She didn't step closer. Just stood in the tree line and watched, long enough to see the door open, long enough to see him. He was carrying a bucket, and for a moment she thought he hadn't seen her. Then he paused, set it down gently. He turned his face toward her, not startled, not even curious, just aware, like he already knew she'd be there one day. They didn't wave, they didn't nod. She simply turned back, heart pounding like she'd run a mile. The dog kept pace beside her, ears tilted forward, eyes sharp. That night there was a second tin on her stoop. Salt, clean, fine grains. She held it in her hands and stared at it like it was something sacred. In the days that followed, he came, down now and then, not every day, but often enough that she stopped wondering when. Sometimes he brought something small, nails, a mended pot, and a slice of bread wrapped in cloth. Once, an old scarf that still held a woman's scent, faint and floral. She didn't ask, he didn't offer, it was warm, and that was enough. When her roof caved in during a storm, he was there before she could climb out of the wreckage, wordless, steady. They stood together in the snow, looking at the broken beams like they were mourning the same thing. "You can take the cabin by the orchard," he said. His voice was like dry leaves, quiet, worn, still alive. "Needs patching, but it's warm enough if you keep the stove fed." She didn't ask why. He didn't wait for thanks. The orchard cabin was smaller, but it had windows that closed and a door that latched right. She swept it clean with an old broom. She found behind the stove, laid the quilt on the bed, and sat for a long time with her hands in her lap. Everything she owned could fit in the basket by her feet. But the wolves didn't feel like they were waiting to fall in on her. The first morning in her new place, she found eggs on the porch. 2 of them, brown-shelled, warm to the touch. The hens must have been his. She cooked one and gave the other to the dog. He ate it delicately, licking the shell after like it might give him more. That day she walked the edge of the orchard, tracing the twisted limbs with her fingers. The trees hadn't borne fruit in years, but they were still rooted, still breathing. She whispered to them without thinking, "I'm still here too." He didn't come that day or the next. When he did, it was without warning. She looked up from the stove, and there he was, standing just past the threshold with a sack of feed in one hand and a coil of rope in the other. "Thought you might want chickens," he said. She took the rope first. It smelled of pine and smoke. They spent the afternoon fixing up the coop. Boards were missing, wire hung loose like brittle lace. He handed her nails without speaking and held the boards steady as she hammered. Once their hands brushed, she flinched. He didn't move. By sunset, the coop stood whole again. 2 hens and a tired rooster blinked at the world from inside it, confused but accepting. He left before the stars came out. She watched him walk down the path, boots thudding softly against the dirt. The hens laid nothing for a week, then 3 eggs at once. She left the extras on his porch with a folded scrap of cloth that smelled like lavender. The scent from the scarf, her only way of saying thank you. Spring didn't arrive all at once. It crept in under the door, slid into the soil, and woke the creek with a whisper. She dug in the thawed earth behind the cabin, fingers aching, breath clouding. She planted peas and potatoes, though she didn't know if they'd grow. It felt like a promise just to try. He passed by that afternoon, on his way to the ridge with a saw slung over his shoulder. He paused when he saw the rose, raised an eyebrow. "It's early," he said. She shrugged. "The earth didn't tell me no." He chuckled once, a sound so soft it might have been wind. Then he walked on, and her heart beat faster than it should have. He started leaving small carvings on her step. A bird, wings curled inward. A fox, alert and crouched. Once a figure she couldn't name. A woman maybe, with her head bowed, hands clasped. She didn't ask what it meant, just set it beside her window where the light hits it in the evenings. She wanted to give him something back, so she carved 2. Rough things, uneven. A spoon. A whistle that didn't work. A little square of wood with his initials burned into it, careful and small. She left them on his porch. He never said anything, but the next carving he left her was a horse, smooth and strong, with a ribbon of cloth tied around its neck. Her scarf. Sometimes he invited her to his porch for supper, never said it outright, just left the door open, 2 bowls on the rail. She'd bring the eggs, or herbs, or whatever wild greens she'd foraged. They didn't talk much while they ate, just listened to the crickets and the wind. Once, an owl landed in the apple tree and stared at them for a long time. She liked those nights. They made her feel like she was part of something again, even if it had no name. One evening he told her about his wife. She'd had a laugh like honey on a skillet, he said. Sweet, sharp, gone too fast. He didn't say how she died. She didn't ask. He looked out over the orchard like the trees remembered her better than he did. She wanted to tell him about her baby, about the way his fingers curled when he slept, about the lullaby she used to hum. But the words stayed in her throat. Instead, she reached out and set her hand beside his on the porch rail. Not touching, just near enough that warmth could pass between them if it wanted to. He didn't move his hand, just let it stay. She slept easier after that. She started humming again when she worked. The dog trotted a little more eagerly at her side. In town, the grocer asked where she'd come from. She didn't answer. The blacksmith's wife offered her a coat. She nodded, wore it home. It smelled like cloves. People noticed her now, not because she was broken, because she was still standing. One day, her husband's sister rode into town and saw her at the market. "You're alive," she said, more accusation than surprise. Ada said nothing. "Just hold the eggs tighter. She won't let you stay," the woman warned. "That land, it's not yours." The words rolled off her like spring rain. She went home and told him, quiet and flat. He didn't say anything for a long while, just stared out at the trees. Then he said, "I don't care what they think." It was the most intimate thing anyone had said to her in years. That night, she left her door unlocked. She dreamed of apples blooming, of laughter on the wind, and of firelight that didn't burn. She woke before sunrise, heart steady, hands warm. She stood at the window and watched the orchard stretch into morning, branches soft with new green, and thought, "I could stay, I could make something here that lasts." When the rooster crowed, she smiled. It was the first time it had felt like hers. The first bloom came in secret. She didn't see it open. She just found it one morning on the lowest branch of the oldest apple tree. A single blossom, pale and trembling, petals like folded paper. The dog sniffed at it, snorted once, and wandered off, unconvinced. But Ada stared a long time, one hand resting on the trunk like it was something sacred. Spring had arrived without asking, slipping through the orchard like a shy child, unsure if it was welcome. She had survived winter, not because she was strong or brave, but because someone had seen her in the cold and done what needed doing. Now she stood in soil, soft with thaw, sleeves rolled up, dirt under her nails, trying to remember how to grow things again. The garden behind the cabin was mostly green now, little shoots pushing upward, stubborn and crooked, peas curling toward the twine she'd stretched between stakes. She talked to them in low tones, not because she thought they could hear, but because her voice needed to be used. Some days it still caught in her throat when she tried to speak. The man, Elijah, visited less often now, not because he was retreating, but because something between them had settled. There was no need to fill silence with presence. She knew his rhythm. He'd pass by once in the morning, sometimes just to nod, sometimes to drop off something useful. A folded shirt with new stitching, a handful of seeds in a jar, or a length of rope neatly coiled. He had taken to fixing the fence along the southern edge of the orchard. Some of the posts had rotted, others leaned like drunks after a storm. He worked slowly, with hands that knew how to wait for things to hold steady. She watched him sometimes. Through the window, watched the way his shoulders moved when he hammered, the way he set each post like a promise. One afternoon, she brought him water in a tin cup. He took it with a quiet thank you, eyes meeting hers just long enough to make her heart flutter, then turned back to his work. She stayed a while, leaning against the fence, the sun warming the crown of her head. They didn't speak much, but every silence between them was softer than the last. When the hens began laying regularly, she walked to town to trade the extra eggs. The journey took half a day on foot, and she passed no other travelers. At first, the people stared. Then they remembered her, the widow, the one who'd been left out past the frost. The blacksmith's wife gave her an old basket. The grocer offered her coffee in exchange for 6 eggs instead of 8. No one said much, but they looked at her with something like curiosity instead of pity, and that was almost enough. She wore her hair braided now, neat and tight. It kept the wind from knotting it. The lavender scarf tied around her throat had faded, but she still wore it, mostly because it reminded her of a hand that had held her gently and let go when it was time. Elijah rarely came to town. When he did, it was for salt, nails, or the rare letter. He had a quiet way of walking, neither fast nor slow, just sure. When people saw him beside her, they glanced once, then turned away. Not in disapproval, but in understanding. One morning he brought her a pot of honey. "I found a hive in the old cottonwood," he said. "Thought you might want some before the bears get clever." She smiled, touched the rim of the pot like it might burn her. "Thank you," she said. He watched her a moment, then looked away. "I could fix your porch step if you like. It leans," she nodded. "That'd be kind." He worked all afternoon, quiet and methodical, pulling up warped boards and replacing them with planks he'd milled himself. When he was done, she brought out 2 cups and the honey and mixed it into boiled water with dried mint. They sat on the new step, the sun soft behind the trees. "Tell me about your boy," he said, "if you want." Her breath caught. Not because it hurt, but because no one had asked. "He had dimples," she said, sipping slowly. "He only smiled twice before he passed. Once in sleep, once at the fire. I used to think he saw something there." Elijah nodded, didn't speak, just let her words hang in the warm air until they faded like steam. The next day he left a small carving on her table, a cradle not more than 2 inches long. Inside, a child curled in sleep. She traced it with her finger, and something in her chest loosened. They weren't in love. Not yet. But there was something growing between them that felt steadier than affection, a knowing, safety. She trusted him in the quiet the way you trust a tree to keep standing through a storm. But nothing good stays untouched. The first sign came when a rider stopped at her gate, hat pulled low, coat heavy with dust. One of her husband's kin, not the cruelest one, but cruel enough. He didn't dismount, just looked at her with sharp eyes and said, "You've made yourself a nice little nest." She said nothing. His gaze flicked to the orchard. That land was his father's once, don't forget that. Still, she said nothing. Elijah came out from the trees just then, axe over his shoulder, sweat on his brow. The rider tensed, spit once. Then he turned his horse and rode away without another word. That night, she didn't sleep, sat by the stove with the dog at her feet, fingers knotted in the hem of her skirt. Elijah came after dark, as if he'd known. "They'll come back," she said. "Yes, they think I don't belong." "You do," he said. "You belong more than they ever did." She looked at him then, really looked, saw the way time had carved lines near his eyes, the way grief lived in the slope of his shoulders. But he stood firm, like something rooted. "Do you mean that?" "Yes." She reached out and took his hand. It was calloused and rough with years of work, but warm. "Thank you," she whispered. He squeezed gently, then let go. They didn't speak of it again. Instead, they planted beans together the next morning. He showed her how to mound the dirt and how to space the seeds. She showed him how to keep the rabbits away with wild mint and ash. They worked side by side until the sun hung low and their backs ached with effort. When they stopped, she leaned into him without thinking. He didn't move away. One evening, as dusk poured across the orchard like molasses, she brought out the carved cradle and set it beside his newest piece, a wolf, lean and alert. "You think they'd have been friends?" she asked, touching the wolf's back. He smiled, rare and soft. "I think they'd have kept each other warm." Her heart broke a little in that moment, not from pain, but from how whole it almost felt. The dog barked once, stood at attention. A rider was coming up the hill, not one of the family this time. A stranger, dusty coat, hard eyes. "Looking for Elijah," the man said when he stopped. Ada stepped forward. "What for? That's his business, isn't it?" Elijah emerged from the trees, shovel in hand. The man glanced between them. "Word is, you've got something that doesn't belong to you. A woman, a cabin, a plot of ground. I've got what I built," Elijah said. "And who stayed?" The man spat. "Law might see it differently." Elijah didn't blink, then let the law come see. The rider scowled, kicked his horse, and left in a spray of gravel. Elijah looked at her. "Are you frightened?" "No," she said. "Just angry." He nodded. "That's a better thing to be." That night they sat closer than before. Her shoulder touched his, neither pulled away. She began to leave her door unlatched. He brought her a piece of paper with his name written at the top and space for hers beneath it. A deed, signed in shaky ink. "I put your name on the land too," he said, "in case anything happens." Her hands trembled. "You don't have to." "I do," he said. "You're not a guest here. You're the reason it stands." She didn't cry. She just folded the paper and tucked it into her apron. Then she took his hand and held it like a branch in storm wind. When the next blossom bloomed, it did so, without hiding, pink and open, trembling in the morning breeze. She stood beside it, heart full, and whispered, "I'm still here." And for the first time it felt like a triumph. The wind changed the day before it happened. Ada felt it in the trees. A strange hush had settled in the orchard, the kind that made the birds go quiet, and the dog stand at the door with his ears high and still. The sky held a yellow hue, as if bruised, and the air had that dry, crackling weight, like pine needles crushed underfoot. She was gathering mint when she smelled it, faint, bitter, unnatural. Smoke, not from her stove or Elijah's chimney, but from somewhere deeper down the hill. Her fingers paused in the soil. The dog growled, low and slow. Then she saw it. A plume rising between the trees, black, rolling fast. Her breath caught. It was the old cabin, the one her husband's family had left her to die in, the one she'd nearly died in. Flames licked from the roof now, bright and wild, devouring the ghost of her past. She stood still a moment. Her heart didn't race. Her hands didn't shake. Just a cold clarity washing over her, steady as spring water. She walked to the edge of the orchard and watched it burn. Elijah arrived minutes later, out of breath, eyes sweeping the trees until they found her. "You're all right," he said, slowing. Only when he saw the fire was too far gone to be stopped. "It's the old place," she said, "just the bones." He stood beside her, hands on his hips, watching as the roof caved in with a sound like the sky giving up. "It's a message," she said after a moment. "I know." They said nothing more, just watched until the flames turned to ash and the sky dimmed. The fire had burned itself out, but the message remained. You don't belong, you don't forget. The next few days passed in uneasy quiet. Elijah kept his axe near. She kept water boiling. The dog slept lighter. The orchard, so full of life just days before, seemed to hold its breath. Then they came, late one afternoon, as the light faded and supper simmered. Hooves cracked down the path. 3 riders. Not her kin this time, but men who bore the same rusted cruelty. Neighbors, cousins, and friends of a dead man with grudges, kept alive like old coals. They stopped just past the fence, didn't dismount, didn't smile. "Are you squatting here now?" one asked, his voice slick as grease. "This is my land," Elijah said, stepping down from the porch, axe resting casually across his shoulder. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. "That woman isn't yours," the second man spat. "Was another man's wife. She doesn't get to start over just because you're fool enough to take her in." Ada stepped out then behind Elijah, her hands empty but strong. "I wasn't asking," she said. The first man laughed. "You have no claim, no blood. That orchard belonged to my uncle once, you know that? We could tear it down by morning and call it even." "You'd have to cross me to do it," Elijah said, and something in his tone made the horses twitch. The men shifted, looked at each other. "Are you threatening us?" "No," he said. "I'm promising. There's a difference." They didn't leave. Not at first, but they didn't step forward either. Eventually they turned their horses and rode off the way they came, slow and heavy, like something unfinished. Ada exhaled only after their silhouettes vanished into the trees. "They'll try again," she said. "I hope they do," he said. She looked up at him. The evening light struck his face just right, and for a moment she saw the boy he must have been, once hopeful, heart wide open, hands too big for what they carried. "Why?" she asked. "Because I want something clear between us." She frowned, confused. "Tomorrow," he said, "come to the apple tree, the one with the stone under it. Wear something. You like or not, just come." He turned then and walked back to his house, leaving her on the porch with the dog pressed against her calf and a sky blooming into stars. The next morning she found a dress folded on her step. Pale linen, simple, tied with a ribbon of rough lace, not new but well kept. She didn't question how he had it, just held it to her chest and breathed in the quiet scent of cedar. At noon she went to the tree. Elijah was already there, waiting, boots clean, shirt tucked, a sprig of apple blossom in his hand. "I don't have much to give," he said. "No preacher, no paper, just this land and what I've built on it. You've given more than anyone ever has," she said. He took her hand then. It was rough, scarred and strong. He held it like it mattered. "I vow to stand beside you," Elijah said, "in winter and fire, in silence and spring. You don't owe me love, just truth." She swallowed hard. Then he spoke. "And I vow to keep walking toward you," Ada said. "When the wind turns, when the fear comes, I won't run again." He smiled, eyes soft. "Then that's all we need." They kissed, not with heat, but with the gentleness of two people who knew how much breaking it took to be whole again. Afterward, they walked back to the cabin. She left the door open behind them. That night they sat by the fire, close but not tangled, the dog asleep at their feet, a kettle simmering on the stove. Outside the wind rose, but it no longer felt like a threat, just a passing thing. 2 nights later the men came back. No words this time, no threats, just fury and fire. They hurled a torch at the porch, but it bounced off wet wood. Elijah had soaked it that morning. The second torch landed in the garden. Ada stomped it out with her boot. The men dismounted. "This is our last warning," one growled. "Then it'll be your last mistake," Elijah said. They rushed him, but Elijah didn't back down. He met them with the axe, not swinging wildly, but measuredly. One blow to the shoulder of the first, a shove that cracked the ribs of the second. The third lunged toward Ada, blade in hand. She didn't flinch. She reached for the shovel by the door and struck his wrist hard enough to make him drop the knife. Then she kicked him once, square in the chest. The dog lunged, teeth bared. Within minutes the men were crawling, limping, and cursing their way back to their horses. They didn't look so sure of themselves now. "We'll tell the sheriff." One shouted, "Do," Elijah said. "He knows what side of the mountain I live on." They didn't return, not that day. Never. The sheriff came eventually, listened to the story, saw the bruises, the blood on the porch, nodded once, said, "Looks like self-defense to me." Ada offered him tea. He declined, left without another word. Elijah repaired the porch rail where the torch had scorched it. Ada replanted the peas. That night, as the stars rose above the orchard, Elijah placed a carved bird on the windowsill. It was a sparrow, wings half spread. "For you," he said, "because you stayed." She picked it up, kissed it once, and set it gently beside the cradle carving. Then she reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. The door remained open that night, a breeze slipping in like a blessing. They didn't speak of the future. They simply began to live it. And though the world outside would turn again, and grief might one day return, they had stood their ground. Together, that was enough. If this story moved you, please let me know where you are listening from. I'd love to hear that. And also like, comment, and subscribe.